So I'm here with Don Kemper in Boise, Idaho on October 20, oh, I forgot to look at the date. I think it's 2030, 29 or 30, somewhere
29,
around
it's
there.
29.
Almost Halloween here, 2019. And I haven't laid eyes on you, Don, for quite a few years, but we go back to, was it 75 or 76 probably? And
Yeah,
the good old days. And
right.
we're going to talk about your contributions and who you are and why in the early days of related wellness kinds of things. Uh, you were immensely successful in launching your project HealthWise that is now used by how many millions? Do you even know?
I think there have been 2 billion downloads of HealthWise information, at least a few years ago. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. So what's your background? How'd you get into all this? Were you what?
Well, it's a strange journey, but I started in engineering. So I have
Oh,
a couple of degrees in engineering, early computer work at the University of Texas. And then I did a master's in health systems engineering at Georgia Tech. But in between, in the midst of that Georgia Tech run, I was about to be inducted into the Army and instead took a commission in the US Public Health Service, as you did.
yeah.
And so I was in Washington, D.C., and one day I happened to go to a talk by an assistant secretary for what was then HEW, Health Education and Welfare, a guy named Vern Wilson. And he, in his speech, he said, the greatest untapped resource in healthcare is the patient.
Yeah.
And right, now we would say the consumer or the person, but back
Well,
then that was kind of
right.
earth breaking. And so that just hit me, and I thought, well, that's what I want to do. I want to tap that resource. I want to focus on that. And so my whole career was focused on sort of the broader aspects of what you might call self-responsibility for health, a lot of medical self-care in the early days, and then much more evidence-based information, but with sprinkles of wellness throughout the process, some in what we did outwardly, and then a great deal of what we did within HealthWise for our own employees. We had a really strong wellness focus there.
Has that maintained since your retirement?
Well, I believe so. You always notice the changes, and they did change. They dissolved the wellness committee that we had had for many, many years, but they have maintained the culture and have found other ways to gain in employee input into the process. And the 3 principles of HealthWise have stayed. The principles of working at HealthWise all revolved around respect, teamwork, and do the right thing. And it was, respect is a gift. You don't have to earn it. If you're there, everybody's going to respect you. The teamwork was, if you help somebody, it's just as important for you to help somebody else meet their goals as it is for you to meet your own. And the do the right thing was, oh, that's the only rule you really need. You do the right thing for yourself, for a teammate, or for a client, or for the public. We're going to back you up. Just do what you think is the right thing.
And
Sometimes
how
we
did
might
you
say,
come up? How'd
how
you
did we
come
come
up
up
with
with
these
that?
3?
Well, my dear wife, Molly Kemper, had a good play in that, a good role in that. When we hit, I think it was 50 employees, and we all of a sudden had to pay attention to all the governmental regulations for how you deal with employees. We said, well, we have built a culture here. Let's write it down. Let's have our own internal rules and guidelines for how we treat each other. And so we had employee input into that process. And what boiled out of that were those 3 principles. And we've stuck with it ever since.
And what were the dates of when you first founded HealthWise and when you reached 50? of
Right.
employees,
Well, I won't remember
roughly.
exactly, but HealthWise was founded in 1975. So I moved. I was at Berkeley for an MPH, and I moved to Boise in 1972. Uh, my first job out of school and out of the public health service to work for a group called Health Systems Incorporated. And it was one of the experimental programs funded by the National Center for Health Services Research. And our job was to rock the boat in healthcare. So one of the things that we did was I was able to take that idea from Vern Wilson way back in public health service and begin to work on very small scale programs. The first one was called The Parents' Role in Healthcare. We invited people to come into a community school education program and talk about how they took care of their own kids. And we would bring in nurses and pharmacists and doctors, and they would have good conversations. And then we tried to scale that with a program called Common Sense, Common Health. This would be 1973, 1974, in which we had 10 public television shows that would present ideas on self-responsibility for health and medical self-care, and then there would be a radio talk show. So we organized little viewing groups from around the city of Boise and the county, PTAs, church groups, etc. They would come together in a home or a church, watch the video, and then they would talk about it and call into the radio show with their questions. So that just seemed like it was so good, common sense approach to helping people do more. Then that organization was about to run out of its grants. It was, well, you remember Ardell would remember well, the old comprehensive health planning agencies.
Right.
And so we were about to become a health systems agency, and which was a follow-up to that. And when that happened, we needed to spin off things like this self-care program. So we spun off HealthWise in 1975.
Same year I started the Wellness Center. Interesting. I hadn't realized that.
Right.
Now, you and Tom Ferguson must have hooked up somewhere along there.
Well, we did indeed. And, Tom was, I think, right out of medical school, was starting the Medical Self-Care magazine. And we invited him as a speaker at a regional self-care workshop that we did in Sun Valley in 1977. And so we had talked with Tom before that, but that's when we really connected. He came and we really did work together on that, and for many, many years following that, including a lot of work together at Stevens Point with National Wellness Institute.
Now, was that the same year that I met you at Sun Valley, or was there another one after that? I thought it was 76 that we met, but
I think you may have been at Sun Valley for something different, because what we were doing they were called regional self-care workshops.
well, Ardell was the one who dragged me along, and
Right.
Whatever it was.
Right. I remember you coming and staying at our home, but I'm foggy. I don't think we brought you there. I think you were traveling through.
Yeah, well, Don brought me there and introduced us, and then we went up to Sun Valley, and I assumed that you were part of that crew that went up there, but I don't remember it.
Okay, and I'm foggy on that as well.
Well,
Ardell and I did a lot of things together. Part of the old health planning agency stuff that I was doing. So we did a series of workshops across Alaska, for example, where it was primarily the Ardell show, but I was there doing medical self-care, which actually seemed to be accepted well by the people up there. I remember one time where I had no medical background, you understand, but one of the things I would do to demonstrate was to show how to remove a fish hook. And so I don't know if you were trained how to do that as a doctor, but how I had this foam pad, and I had a hook and some fishing line, and I would stick it into the foam pad and show how you could depress it and pop it out. And the hook would the barb on the hook would follow the shaft out. Fine. Well, I remember this very clearly. We were in Ketchikan, and there was a fisherman that was part of the health planning agency's board. He said, I get caught with fish hooks all the time. I want to see how this works. And he takes the fish hook and sticks it in his thumb. And then I was supposed to get it out. And it worked. So,
Oh, great.
But so those are some good old early days in trying to do that. And
So when did you then reach the 50 employees and have to get a lot more?
that was probably around 1986 or 87. So it was, we were very small for the first 10 years. 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, a good bit of grant support in the early days. We did write the HealthWise Handbook in 1976. 1975, we wrote it. It was really published in 76. And it bombed. It bombed.
Like my wellness inventory.
Right. But, HarperCollins was the publisher, and they printed 25,000 copies. And I think they sold 10,000. And the best thing in the world was we bought it back. So we bought it back. And of course, since then, we sold over 33 million copies, over 19 editions. But, so little tweaks of fate made it for HealthWise. Who would have thought that was a bad thing?
Yeah. Well, then, are you still revising it every couple of years, or?
Bless their hearts. We knew it's been so clear that the internet just trumped. Sorry to use that word. The book, and so blessedly they waited until Molly and I retired, and then they retired the book. Because the internet has thousands times more information, and you can keep it up to date, and you can make it more animated, and you can deliver it to the right people at the right time. So I wasn't sad about it. Well, it was a little sadness because we really grew up with that book, and that book was, you could say, was our venture capital that gave us the money to advance HealthWise all through those years. Mm-hmm. Particularly in the early days of the internet, when in those days, we used to talk about looking for information on the internet for healthcare was a lot like trying to find wild mushrooms in the forest. If you really knew where to look and what to look for, you could go home with some real treasure. But if you didn't, you could die. And so we worked really hard to try to create this concept of evidence-based medical information that was validated and using the scientific method and good randomized clinical trials and trying to really identify what was the right thing to put out. And then our expertise was in translating it into people talk, trying to put it into simple language that people could understand. And we blessedly, we were very early in the process, and so we gained a pretty big reputation and a big clientele fairly early on. This would be in the early 90s as we got to that. So I skipped over all the 80s, but when we got to the 90s, we really started to grow fast. In the 80s, we were working much more, as a lot of people in wellness were, on workshops. So we did medical self-care workshops for thousands of people where they would get the book and they would also get education from trainers on how best to use it. We also dipped into, I guess the first wellness-related book was a book called Growing Younger. Now, we didn't know better back then that was a bad thing. Now you don't want to say age is bad. So, but back then, Growing Younger seemed like a good idea. And we created this book and workshop program that would bring people into workshops at the senior center, mostly in Boise. And they would learn to, better fitness, better nutrition, better stress management, a little bit of medical self-care, and a little focus on how to be a good person. That was a program that was replicated in about 22 states around the country. Hospitals would pick it up, and we would train their trainers in how to do that.
Wonderful. How do you train someone to be a good person? That sounds like a pretty
Well, you let them talk to each other, and that was really the key. I'll tell you a little side story from that is that a spin-off of that group was a group that we initially started and then let it go. It was called the Happy Hoofers. It was a walking group of seniors in Boise. And now, 37 years later, they're still walking. Now it's, most have died off and their replacements are walking. But a few years ago, I checked in and I had heard, at least the rumor was that there had been 27 marriages within that group.
Wow.
So, that's helping you be a better person in one sense or another.
A matchmaking
Right.
side effect. Yeah.
Right. We help people find each other. So that was a good thing.
I'm curious, back in the early days, late 70s, 80s, how the established allopathic medical, shall we call it, fraternity took to all of this. Did you have much overlap? I mean, eventually you got into hospitals and were accepted, but what was the transition like?
Right. Well, that's a good question. And I have a prop here, which I just hold up for you. But this is a Declaration of Health Independence that was written for July 4th, 1976. So the bicentennial. It starts out, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for individuals to dissolve their professional bands of medical dependency and to assume among their obligations the primary responsibility for their own health.
Wow.
So we were a bit radical in the early days, and indeed we had a lot of pushback. We had a lot of pushback from docs, and so we finally we're smarter than you can imagine, but we finally realized that if we really wanted to make an impact, we have to find a way to integrate more with the medical industrial complex, if you will.
Right.
And we did, and we began to work with the big HMOs. So the HMOs were beginning to come into play about that time, not in 76, but in the 80s, toward the end of the 80s. We once made a presentation. Molly Kemper, my wife, was going off to HealthNet in Southern California to present a huge sale that we had set up with them, where they were going to train thousands of their members in medical self-care. And before she left, Molly and I talked about it, and we said, they've already bought into this sale. That's not the problem. What you need to tell them is that every person in their membership that doesn't have our book is at a disadvantage. And they bought a book for every subscriber. So, that was a huge bonanza for us.
Yeah.
A year or two later, Kaiser bought books for all of their people in Northern California and then Southern California. So those were the big things that got us tracked with what we thought were good. Certainly Kaiser is a really high quality health system, very much evidence-based, and we greatly benefited from working with them through the years. And they also held us to a pretty high standard. So we had to make sure that the information we were presenting, that they were trusting us to give to their members, was a positive thing. It was evidence-based.
Now, some of our viewers may be so young that they don't know what an HMO is. It stands for Health Maintenance Organization, and Kaiser was the granddaddy of them all. But and I don't even know that, nowadays you don't hear that that term, but out here in California, Sutter's the other big one, and then there's UCSF. But how did that evolve?
Well,
or the early ones,
right.
Besides Kaiser.
Right. There was legislation that. Oh, I'm sorry. Legislation created the opportunity to develop these health maintenance organizations. And in fact, one of my jobs in the early days before HealthWise
Excuse me.
Was to work with an attorney in Boise to write legislation for the state legislature that would allow health maintenance organizations to practice. Because prior to that, the Blue Cross laws would have prevented the kind of thing. But Kaiser was a model, group health cooperative in Puget Sound in the Seattle area.
I remember them. Mm-hmm.
They've now merged together a few years ago. But for years, that was our model. And in this Health Systems Incorporated I was in, we tried to set up an HMO in Boise. It was called GEM Health, because GEM is our state stone, I guess. And it survived for about 5 years. Heavy medical association push against it, and it dropped out. But in other parts of the country, the HMO movement went very, very well, and they grew. And the big issue there was they were responsible for both the delivery of care and the insurance. And so they had that combined responsibility. They could much better align with the purpose of the consumer. At least in good ones, they did that.
Well, I
wanted to go back.
That's a part of the definition of an HMO is they handle the insurance. So if that's true, still, then Kaiser's probably the only one that still does, because the others are like Sutter aren't self-insured, are they?
Well, I'm not familiar with Sutter, but I think they all now have elements that are very similar to health maintenance organizations. And if you think of the Medicare Advantage plans that Medicare aligns with, those all have some of the similar characteristics.
Yeah.
They deliver care. They're usually associated with a clinical group. But I wanted to go back to something, and I wondered if you knew about this. So I always think you and Ardell I think that the wellness movement began with Dunn. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to know if you know the name Brock Chisholm.
No, I don't think I do.
Okay, I see. Before I started HealthWise, I had a job offer from the World Health Organization in Colombia, South America. And I learned a lot about WHO at that point. So World Health Organization. And Brock Chisholm was one of the 3 people that wrote the Constitution to the World Health Organization, the World Health Organization's Constitution. And in it, he defined health as being, what is the word? It's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. And I still think that's as good a definition of wellness as there ever was. And I know that Dunn commented on that definition in his earliest essays.
Mm-hmm.
So
1948 was the date on that, I recall.
I think that's when it was ratified. It was written in 46, the year I was born. So at any rate, when wellness showed up, I had already been keyed by my thinking about that well-being. Sure. And I thought, oh, this is something I want to get in on. At that point, I was sort of a health planning focus. And so I got caught into Ardell's thing in Mill Valley, where I at least went by your clinic. I didn't go into the clinic, but I knocked on the door and it wasn't open the day I went. I don't know, it was part of that on my way to the workshop. But I was certainly aware of all that you were doing at the Wellness Resource Center back then. Right.
Yeah, it must have been a weekend, because the building, we had only 2 of the 9 offices in the building. A psychiatrist remodeled an old house and set up these offices, and we had a hot tub and a sauna downstairs, when that was unheard of. It's since been torn out. A lawyer moved in, and they have a library down there in the basement. But Yeah, I wish I actually got a video of it with my granddaughter and my daughter walking around, and she was like 7 years old then, and she remembered it. So we documented
Oh,
what's
nice.
still there of the space. But well, back to we were talking about your acceptance and working your way into the system and the pushback that you got. I
Right.
got some originally in Marin, but by and large, I was ignored. I got some pushback in Ashland, Oregon, when I was invited up there before I started the center, and I thought it might be a location to start it, but the doctors there were so hostile, I
Uh,
quickly saw the writing on the wall. But any other
I think that's
relationship
been
issues?
I think that's been largely generational. I think as the old guard physicians retired, the new,
Mm-hmm.
at each generation, they became more and more supportive of well-being and all, broader views of health, not just surgeries and medications.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Although there's still that bias in terms of the
Big
economic.
pharma.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And, health-wise never worked with big pharma at all, although we had so many opportunities to do that. We just didn't do it.
That
We did,
was wise.
yeah, we did for many years were the primary resource for WebMD, but they pushed their pharma so much, we decided to pull back. And so
Mm-hmm.
to my knowledge, I've been gone for 3 years now, but to my knowledge, we're still not working with WebMD. And virtually all of the HealthWise clients don't align drug ads with our content.
Good idea. Yeah. Well, and the shift in medical practice from individual, solo practitioners like my dad and the other ones in my hometown of Bluffton, Ohio, to having corporate overlords, as one guy expressed it, I was seeing locally, who are calling the shots along with big pharma and insurance companies. The loss of autonomy, uh, which would have a two-way street of it might make them more amenable to programs like yours coming through a system, and also not as much pushback. So anything more to say on that era?
Well, I should probably bring Molly in. I think she's in the room next door. I'll ask her to call in
Oh,
because I don't know if you ever knew this about Molly, but she was an author of this A Healthy Old Age,
uh-huh.
which was part of the Wallingford Wellness Project
What
in
what
Seattle.
what
The
what was the first word?
Wallingford.
Wallingford. I never.
Wallingford Wellness. And Wallingford is a neighborhood in Seattle. And they
Uh-huh.
had funding from the National Office on Aging to develop what was then called health promotion for older adults. And so Molly, with Stephanie Fall Creek, wrote this book and then did lots of speaking around the country in the 80s. I think the book was written in 82. And so, Molly, are you around? Okay, come on in.
But
So she'll
great, get two for the price of one.
Right. We'll have her slip in and tell us a little about those old days because she was going around the country and working with Ardell and with Keith Sennert and other folks. Molly?
Oh, I forgot about Keith Sennert. That's a name. I don't know if I ever met him, but his name was certainly
Uh-huh.
everywhere.
So
Hi,
Hi,
Molly.
Jack.
Hey,
Hi. Let's
great.
there you go. Right.
see.
So we've been a real partner in crime on this for so many years. Molly came to HealthWise in '85, and we did this book together back then, which is a mental wellness book for older adults called Growing Wiser, in which we were trying to dispel some of the myths of aging.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you like to say?
Well, I was joking with Don, not, I would, cut.
She's a great speaker,
Yeah,
generally.
generally, but I've been off in the world of another world. But I was joking with Don earlier about my early days in wellness because I worked at the Wallingford Wellness Project, and this is back in 79, 80, 81. Not as early as you and Don, but still pretty early in the
Very,
day.
yeah.
Yeah, and working at the Wallingford Senior Center to do health promotion for older adults. And it was an interesting population to work with for a number of reasons, but one of them was to overcome the whole myth about aging, especially aging in America, because we would talk to physicians about teaching stress management, nutrition, exercise, and something we called environmental awareness. How do you create a well environment for yourself?
Mhm.
And the pushback we would get would be that old people won't be interested. And if they're interested, it won't make any difference.
Too late for them.
Too late for them, right. Hello. We had a really dedicated group of people who participated in our programs. But the joke was that wellness was such a new concept that people kept calling it, instead of the Wallingford Wellness Project, they would call it the Wellington Wellness Project. They just kept making that stuff up. So yeah, I'm an early pioneer in senior wellness.
But when we developed this program, which was again another workshop program that was picked up by hospitals around the country, they would have their workshops, hand out the book, and have people go through. Was it 10 sessions?
This?
Four sessions. Four sessions, and we played with it. So we included in the script this duel between the naysayer of aging, that was telling people that you're too old, it's past your time, etc., and the sage of aging, which was, and so we once were asked, and we did this in Adelaide, Australia, at a meeting of the World Health Organization. But, do you know the name Lester Breslow?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, one of the grand old men of public health.
And now we're older than
And now
he
we're
was.
older than he
Yes.
was, right? But we were in a room where he was the moderator, and at one point we were doing the presentation. I slipped out of the room and came back in with a black mask, a black cape, a black hat, and Molly meanwhile is slipping on this blue and gold cape as the sage, and I was coming in as the naysayer. Well, they thought it was a terrorist attack. Everybody was up in arms. Whatever. Lester Breslow may have lost a year of life. I don't know. But then, once they figured out that this was all part of the story, they called in the photographers. We were the stars of the show. So it was a good fun. So
Well, good thing they didn't drag you off to jail or shoot you.
That's right.
This is all back in 88. And it seemed to me that, I don't know whether it was because we were based out of Boise, Idaho, or whether we were just, it was new and freewheeling, but there just felt like there was more elasticity in the movement to have a little bit more fun, to sort of play with the boundaries of wellness. And I don't know if that same boundary stretching is available in a time of so much data collection, but we really had a good time.
We did.
Yeah, well, just to witness what's happened to the National Wellness Conferences from the early days where it was like summer camp for adults to now where it's a corporate thing in Florida in hotels. The loss of that playfulness, and it's sad to me as to how they talk about the wellness industry. I cringe whenever I hear that. I picture smokestacks with industry.
Anything but smokestacks, John.
Yeah.
Ah,
Well, there were a lot of good people doing that. That's certainly true. But we should talk a little bit about wellness at HealthWise, because Molly.
Yeah, that's the next thing of your corporate culture, which I remember being impressed both by the building when I saw it for the first time. Wow, this is
Uh-huh.
very. Can you tweak your camera so we're got your face split down? Oh, yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So we see all of you.
Okay.
Good.
Good. So, well, I told you the three principles of wellness. I will just tell you a little sidestep on that, which is we have these three, what you might call Chinese moon gates, these circular pipe art that goes around an entrance into HealthWise. And they're supposed to, as you walk into the building, you're supposed to be thinking respect, teamwork, do the right thing. Each of the gates is a symbol of that. A lot of our art at HealthWise is related to our culture.
Mhm.
So at one point, I learned that my executive assistant, a very dear woman, was going up the steps. She had been having a difficult time with our board. She stepped around the respect gate and went through the other two.
she said, I'm just not feeling it today. I'm not feeling it today.
So I thought that was a good thing, that people are at least paying attention and focusing. But we also, we have an Inukshuk. I don't know if you know that term, but
No.
it's an Alaska Native art. It's a functional art that they would build on the tundra that would show the way to the good hunting ground or show the way home. And we built a big Inukshuk at HealthWise to point the way to good health information. And we did a lot of things like that just to reinforce the basic principles that we were trying to do. But and then every year we would have a day devoted to employee wellness, and the wellness committee would kind of create the
Every day
program.
was devoted to wellness. Can I say a little bit about the genesis of this, which ties
Please.
back into that spaciousness of being able to create something instead of inheriting something. In the mid-90s, we were going to meet the goal of having 50 employees. And back then, when you got to be 50 employees, all these federal workplace regulations come into place. And we had to work our way through those. But we said, well, there's the federal regulations, and what are going to be our regulations? What are we going to say is core to HealthWise? So we met with small groups of employees and basically posed the questions: what do you like now? And as we grow, what do you want to make sure we carry into the future?
Mm-hmm.
So all this came right out of all the employees who were currently employed. And they said things like, we get to bring dogs. We want to continue to be able to bring dogs. We like the dress code, which is please do. We want to keep that one. We like our workplace flexibility. We like being able to adjust our hours to go attend kids' track meets and the like. They liked easy access to Don. And so it was that springboard of saying, well, we have to do this, but what do we want to do
Mm-hmm.
that supports that? And then going to the people and saying, what works for you? And out of that came these three, well, they had already been there, but we codified it almost with the respect, teamwork, and do the right thing.
And then a real key thing that we have done ever since, at least up until 3 years ago, I think they're still doing it, is we would have an anonymous employee satisfaction survey every 6 months. And so people would identify what team they were on, but not their individual, not who they were. And they would respond to a variety of the same questions every time, which were things like, do you feel respected?
Do you feel listened to?
Listen, a lot of just basic good questions
Yeah.
related to that. And then the two questions at the end were, what do you like about HealthWise and what could do better? And, if you were to read one versus the other of those answers, if you just printed out all of the 200 answers of what could be better, you would think we were in the worst place in the world. If you read all the ones of what I like about it, you would think we were in the best place in the world. I would have to read one sheet and one sheet, one sheet and one sheet. And our whole leadership team would read that. And then with a few edits of things that were too personal, we would let everybody read what all the comments were. And that is, it required a great deal of trust on leadership to be able to expose ourselves to that. But it also showed us exactly the way people were feeling, and how when tensions arose in one team, we could focus on that one team and help them come back into a real good wellness state. And then it was interesting how the problems would shift around from one team to another, because each team would self-correct once they saw that was happening. So it's good.
Did you ever have to fire any people that were just not getting it?
We won't go there.
Molly's nodding her head.
Well, he's demurring, and I'm nodding my head. We paid a lot of attention to hiring, of attention to hiring, thinking that was probably the most important job that we had. And so people would often talk about their health-wise employment journey. And it was like, and then I had to meet with 15 people, and then I had to do this. But the whole idea is this person, not only are they bringing a skill set with them, are they bringing a willingness to collaborate? Are they someone who's going to honor the contributions of others? Are they going to be people who can think independently? And we spent a lot of time hiring for the skill set and the fit. So it wasn't very often that we had to let someone go or someone moved on. But every now and then, sure, it was just like, it's not working out. And we invite you to move along. But the coolest thing, John, was that we had a real history of people saying, oh, this is great, and I'm going to go explore another career, or I'm going to go work for another one, and having a lot of returnees who would go out, get kind of rebooted by another environment, and then come back and say, whoa, glad to be home.
We had a great team early on that, including Jim Giuffre and Gene Drabinski, Steve Schneider, Molly, of course, and except for Molly, people would particularly Jim and Gene, left several times to go. Jim went to be the director of a health department, ended up the director of the health department in Ada County around Boise. Gene went to work for a variety of our clients, but every time they would come back and come back with more experience, more understanding, and more appreciation for who we were and what we did. That's happened. It continues to happen. I hear about people that left health-wise since we've been retired and have now come back. So it's a nice thing, and there's no real animosity about leaving, because we fear that we're a really mission-driven organization. The mission has always been very simple: help people make better health decisions. So if you're going to go somewhere else and do that mission, we're fine with that.
So the two of you then met at HealthWise, and how did you wind up cohabiting, as it were?
We're under contract.
Molly was at the University of Washington when we met, and I'd been funded by the Kellogg Foundation in those early days, and the Wallingford Wellness Project had some other funding, but related. Kellogg as well.
No, we had Administration on Aging funding.
Right. And so I went to visit her there, and then I later saw her do a presentation. And then when we were developing the Growing Wiser program, she applied for the job, as did another person from the Wallingford Wellness Project. And she at that time was living in England. She had gone to Finhorn, the community in northern Scotland, but she was living in Devon. And our interview was on the phone. There was no Zoom meeting back then. And we offered her the job and she said yes. So
Yeah, I thought, oh, I'm going to give Boise, Idaho 2 years. 2 years I'm going to stay in that place. And now it's been 35. So the fit was good.
and what I say was she was so good, I had to marry her to keep her, but because I fell in love.
Well, it was a good run for us, you know, to work together. It was, we managed to make it work because our skills were so complementary.
Mhm.
And the only
We had a tough year in
Yeah.
2002.
yeah.
I have a prop for that, but in 1 year, we both wrote this book, Information Therapy, and remodeled the house.
Oh boy.
At the same time.
Never heard of the
And oh, was it brutal? I mean, Molly is an incredibly good writer, and I have incredibly good ideas, and they meld together. But whoever would write the first draft of a chapter would just get creamed by the other person.
That's right. And we called it yes, damn it, editing. It's like, you're right, damn it. Okay, I'll change it.
I don't know if you had similar experiences in writing the wellness workbook, et cetera, but you co-authored a number of things.
we had our moments. By the time we finished the book, Regina went off to India to recover.
Okay, can I get further away?
I went to Costa Rica. She went to India.
Well, there was some issue around.
We did
Oh,
come
we did
back
well.
together. We did a second edition 8 years later, or 7 years later, and then a third edition in 2004. But no, it's someone said it's co-authoring is like a marriage without the sex.
We got there. Oh, yeah. Well, it's more like divorce court.
Yeah.
At any rate, that was good. This information therapy book, which didn't sell many copies, I mean, I don't know, 10,000 maybe, but it really made a difference in the way our work at HealthWise was presented to the world, because the whole concept was your doctor should be prescribing information just as they prescribe the drug or the test or the surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And we advocated successfully for building in information prescriptions into the electronic medical record programs that hospitals were using. And so we created the Center for Information Therapy. We had conferences every year and really promoted that idea. And it was built into the meaningful use regulations that the federal government created to say that we will subsidize your medical record, doctor, if you include the ability to prescribe information to your patients, because that was part of their definition of meaningful use.
Oh, yeah. I just had my Medicare wellness checkup, you know, the annual one.
Right.
And at the end of it, my doctor printed out a take-home set of papers about some things to think about. And sure enough, they were from HealthWise. I was so proud.
Did he know about the connection, or did you?
I think she did, yeah. But it was just built into that hospital system's electronic medical record. And I just, you know, a little pride of ownership.
Yeah.
It was nice.
Well, you could.
At one point, somebody figured out that 1 out of 4 practicing physicians in the U.S. was able to prescribe HealthWise information to their patients. So that's how we got to that 2 billion.
Way from when I in 72 or so, and I was still doing a little clinical work in the Public Health Service Hospital. I was prescribing the Angry Book of Theodore Isaac Rubin's, which was the only thing I could find at the Hopkins Medical Bookstore that seemed to relate hypertension to psychological states. And the woman I remember prescribing it to actually lowered her blood pressure. I was impressed. Early days of that. And then with Tom Ferguson moving into medical informatics and that whole, was that the 90s that was becoming?
We HealthWise helped fund the sub-conference at the National Wellness Institute at their summer camp that Tom organized. Tom was the organizer, and we participated, and we helped fund that initial health informatics effort that he was doing.
Is that still in operation? I don't remember that.
I don't think so. I don't.
Yeah.
I think
He had something to do out east. Was it connected with a medical school in the east at some point, or is that just maybe a conference location that I?
Right.
remember?
I'm not sure. And Tom helped us a lot, and we went to. He had a place. His wife had a place called Cook's Branch in Texas, and we went there. I think with Bill Hetler and Richard. Richard Rockefeller was a party to that as well, trying to figure out what's the future of HealthWise, what's the, which way should we go? In the end, Tom did not embrace the concept of information therapy.
Really?
He really was so focused on self-help. He didn't trust doctors to prescribe information to their patients. He wanted the patients to find it for themselves from other patients. So the activated patient was his big thing. And so we had some wonderful debates and conversations around that, but I don't know that we ever won him over to information prescriptions. Right.
Interesting. I want to shift to a related area that I'm curious about, because around this same period, I started hearing the term health promotion and movements around that, which I was aware of, but not really that connected with. And sounds like you're in the center of it, but was it Michael McDonald was the big name in that? And
sure.
Who are some of the other players, and how did that relate to HealthWise, if at all?
Well, we were for many years a party to their national health promotion conferences. What do they call it?
Health promotion conferences, and there's the Journal of Health Promotion.
Right,
too.
and they were doing a good job of evidence-based health promotion research and promoting that as part of it. They were much more employer-oriented than we were.
And government focused too.
And government focused.
Yeah.
But Michael, who else was the people that were from? Boy, my brain is.
Well, there was the Centers for Disease Control had a piece of that pie as well, and there was a sort of co-location of public health and health promotion kinds of information exchanges and conferences. But it seemed to me, John, back in those days in the late 70s and 80s, there was like little mushrooms popping up across the country, not yet coalesced around a movement, but people floating the idea, each with a different take. It's like my colleagues and I doing things with older adults, you doing things very much with if I may say, self-actualization around wellness and personal growth. The CDC doing sort of big policy-based things. And everything is sort of matured. The CDC cares a lot about evidence-based, self-care, evidence-based, health promotion, evidence-based, chronic care management. It's all gotten a little bit less, I don't know if mushrooms is a good analogy, but a little less organic and a little bit more pro forma in my mind.
The Wild West has been tamed, in other words.
Yeah. So what's coming up next, I wonder?
But health promotion, Molly was on the board and at one point chair of the National Council on Aging, and started their Health Promotion Institute, was it called?
Yeah.
And which ran for many years. Is it still happening? I don't know.
Oh, they reorganized. But the story about the kid with the hammer and everything looks like a nail. My hammer was health promotion, wellness, disease prevention, self-care, self-management, all for older adults. It's like how this is a country that's getting older. We're going to be, the whole country is going to look like Florida in a couple, well, by next year, about 20% of the country is going to be age 65 and older. And it's like, how can we take this important human activity of self-health and make it bloom within an older population? So that was my lifelong drive.
There's one aspect of that Molly and I worked on very hard, but we didn't get it to happen while we were at HealthWise. And it was something that we called More Good Days. Yeah. And the basic idea was that as you reach the end of life, and so often you're in a medical situation, and the question that you ask is, or the question that the doctor answers is, here's what we could do for you. And what we were trying to do is to get people to shift the question to simply say, what can you do that will give me more good days? Because I know that some of these treatments will take away good days. Yeah. And I'm going to see what the balance is before I decide to do this treatment.
That's a great way of framing it. Yes.
And apparently there's been some work on that since we left. And I had just heard a little hint that there's some evidence coming back from somebody that studied it, but I don't know the answer yet. So I'm hoping that's, but we had a really hard time, partly because of dear Sarah Palin, who talked about the death panels. Yeah. We had a really hard time getting our big hospital and health plan clients to touch it at all.
But now there's more an environment of that through the Wisconsin-based Honoring Choices or Respecting Choices program. Just getting people to understand what's important to them in late life care, and then making that be known across all of their providers and within a system. We have a long way to go, but we particularly were fond of this More Good Days concept because we heard from someone that more good day, any day in which there's baseball and or chocolate ice cream is a good day. So, as long as he could enjoy one or both of those, let's keep going.
But the deal is everybody gets to define it for themselves.
Exactly.
Right.
Soccer and vanilla, I guess, or something like that.
Exactly. Good.
Oh, great. Well,
fun. And I'm wondering, John, I've seen a couple of the tapes you've done with others, and I'm wondering, have you reached out to some of the women who were early in the movement, or people of color, or getting a diverse point of view?
Well, Meg Jordan, I just did the other day, and Elaine Sullivan was early on.
Yeah, we saw that tape. Love Elaine.
Yeah, Sandy Queen was booked to be yesterday, and then she had an emergency and canceled. And I thought I could book her in after you today, but not till next Tuesday.
Okay, Sandy Queen, great. Love Metcalf. She was. I remember seeing her a lot at the wellness.
Yeah, I've only met her once up in Lake Louise at that Campbell's Soup thing, and haven't had much contact with her, but yeah, she'd be another one. I know she and Meg are close, so I could reach out. It's expanding from, I started with my original, the people I spent the most time with.
Sure.
And then I realized there were also people that I didn't know that well, but their work was developing alongside mine as yours was. And I'm planning to expand, as long as I keep going with this. I have no idea how it's ever going to get put out there.
Right. Well, you're doing a real gift to all us old folks. So,
yeah.
and one of the names that we did a lot of co-thinking with and helped us evolve was David Sobel. I don't know if you ever worked with David Sobel, who was at
A
Kaiser.
little bit. I looked him up the other day to see if he was still around. I don't know that we ever actually even met, but his name kept coming up.
But he and others wrote some wonderful books, Healthy Pleasures. And well, he edited The Ways of Health early on in his career. And then he worked with Kate Lorick a lot on self-management of chronic disease. But he was at Kaiser and had some really good research background around some of what we would often think of as the softer sciences, but he could really make a compelling case for how mental wellness fits into a person's life.
And I'm just realizing that the only person of color that I know in the wellness field was Craig Washington. And I put him on my list. So any other names you can think of?
Everybody will lead you to another person. So pose the
Yeah.
question to Craig, and
Growing
and I'll
like
be
Topsy.
thinking on that. I get the impression we're winding up, and I
think we
want
should.
to tell Jax a memorable exchange I had with you, and I don't think you'll remember it at all, but it has imprinted itself in me and changed my behavior.
Really?
Now, yes. How tall are you, Jack?
I always tell people 4 feet 29 inches.
But really, you're 6 what?
6'5". It's a
6'5".
math question.
You're a tall man.
Yeah.
The last time Don and I met up with you was the last year. I think we were at Stevens Point, and you were there, and we encountered you on a sidewalk, and you and John, Don, I'm sorry, Don.
She's just getting to know me.
Yeah, that's right. The two of you, Don and John, big hug and everything. And then I stepped in to hug you, and you made the comment, you said, I'm pretty petite, significantly shorter than you are. And you said that it's uncomfortable for you as a tall man to get hugs from short people because their faces are kind of rubbing around in your stomach. I don't know if you remember this, but I thought, yeah, that would make me uncomfortable too. And ever since then, when I've met someone I don't come up to at least their shoulders, I'll just stick out a hand because I don't want them to feel uncomfortable with my face rubbing around in their stomach.
Well, what I always do is look for a stair step or a curb nearby, and often I can find one, and I put them up. Are you a one stepper or a two stepper?
Oh, that's
Get them
nice.
up to my closer to eye level. But and when I encounter another guy around my height, I'll say, "Oh, it's good to see another normal sized human being." And I said that to one guy at a concert once. He said, "Yeah, they're not building them up to specs anymore."
You're not building them up to spec.
And I will end on this memory, which is there was a particular period of time when I was traveling a lot, and on every airplane I entered, I looked for your dot. Right. So
did you ever find one?
Oh, certainly I did. I did find one. Absolutely. And it was like it made my day. Right.
Great.
So
Yeah, a couple other people I've talked to have found them, but I had to give that one up. For those who don't know this, it's actually in the wellness workbook too, Making the World Smaller with Dots. I used to use these 3/4 inch self-adhesive dots that I'd buy at the stationery store, and I'd put them on an airplane up near the front, just to the right of the no smoking sign, back in the days when we had no smoking signs. So I would recognize when I was on another airplane. I was flying a lot in the late 70s, and I could see if I'd been on that airplane before. And I found a few that I'd been on, and then I would get reports from people like you that also did.
You've dotted this plane. Well, know that you've had a broader wider and greater impact beyond self-adhesive dots in place, because you were one of the first people's names I encountered in my own first steps into wellness as a way of life. So thanks for that. And this has been fun.
Indeed.
Well, great. I'm so glad you were able to join us. That was an unexpected bonus. So great.
Good.
Well, let's say goodbye. Actually, Don, stay on because there's another optional, maybe addenda that I'd like to record, but we may or may not use.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Mwah.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
I'll try to hug you virtually.
Is she a one-stepper or a two-stepper?
I'm a three-stepper.